The yellow ropes. So we are going to kind of go through a little bit of what, well, one, how Surfrider got involved from Lee and Alexa, who invited us to come along and clean up ropes one day. And then this kind of evolved into this just, passion type campaign that we've kind of dove into. So we're going to go through real quick and talk with Lee and Alexa, who are going to give us a little background about how they got involved, how they started their journey on cleaning up the ropes, and the data they're collecting. Just give us a little bit of background of what kind of where their numbers are at, what they're doing with it, and why they're collecting the data. And then we're gonna have John talk to us a little bit about the history of the yellow ropes. He's kind of he is the go-to on this subject in the whole, the Westport area, and give us a little background of where they came from, what they are, and how they get washed up on the beach, and just kind of a little bit of to give us the ins and outs of why they're there. And then what's really cool about this whole process is that we've found that it's kind of full circle in that we have the growers, the where they come from, group of people interested in cleaning them up, and then also everybody collectively coming together to figure out, now what do we do with them. So we one of the solutions that we're working with is with Nicole through Net Your Problem on how we could recycle and reuse these ropes. And then there's a whole nother piece of these ropes that are also in the oyster shell clumps, and trying to figure out, working with the growers associations, and how to find a way to separate the oyster shells from these yellow ropes, so that the shells, and I may be way off on this, we'll get more details, can be crushed up to be reused back into the environment, but also in, I believe in like construction type, situations and things like that. So there's a lot of cool things that could be done with Full Circle here, but it's just kind of figuring out this yellow rope issue. So we're going to start with Lee first, is from the Twinharbor Waterkeepers, and Alexa with the StreamTeam. And those two are going to give us a little bit of background on what they do and how they got us going down this road of the yellow ropes.
Great. Thanks, Jill. I actually have like 6 slides here, and I think I'll take the first 2, and then the second 2 I think would be really good for Alexa.
Okay. Sounds good.
So,
and I have a map of our sampling locations too that I'd like to share, and then some data after you're done, Lee.
Oh, cool. So this is Jill's fabulous picture here.
That's your hand.
So I guess it was probably about 3 years ago when I first started working in the Twin Harbors. I didn't really know anybody. I went for a lot of walks on the beach, and I was just like blown away by how many yellow ropes I found. And I had no idea, where they came from. And, but I started to collect them. And then, it just really bothered me. Like it was the most prevalent kind of trash on a lot of days that I was out there. And so then I learned a little bit about where they came from, and I met some locals like John Shaw, and I guess it was about a year ago. Well, no, not quite a year ago. Last summer. That I had an idea to form a work group. And so I had been talking to some oyster growers, the Oyster Grower Association. I talked to John, I talked to some of the really big growers like Taylor Shellfish. My first instinct as a waterkeeper was to start some kind of legal action, actually. And I talked to the non-point pollution people at Ecology, because, once I learned that these were, they're kind of an illegal discharge from a shellfish farm. So I talked to ecology people about it. I talked to Sea Grant people. I talked to Alexa at Grays Harbor StreamTeam. And then, so I just decided it was time to start this kind of informal work group with all these groups that are listed here. And fortunately, we have Twin Harbors Waterkeeper has a grant from the Department of Ecology where we were already doing some outreach about microplastic and single-use plastic. And this is a photo that I got from John of some, other people that have lived out in the Westport, Tokeland area, of course, have known about this problem for years. So, this, and John has known about it for years. And so the really big issue with these plastic ropes are, they're just making microplastic. And we all know that, we have microplastic in shellfish now. We have it in, it's everywhere. It's getting into our food chain. So, so that's one of the reasons that we wrote this kind of project into our public participation grant. And so even before we started this, this yellow work group, we started a project that I'm going to let Alexa talk about because she's kind of the brains behind this part of the operation.
So we had funds to do education and outreach in the classroom on microplastics and single-use plastics. And so we would start out teaching students about plastics, about how, things can be recycled, but, inevitably, they do tend to end up in the dump, and how to reduce their use of those single-use plastics. And then also how and why those plastics break down into microplastics. And then we went in and taught students through a lab procedure and showed them these microplastics in our beach sand. And so we took sand samples and we stirred them in water, and that allowed the microplastics to separate from the sand particles. And then we put it through a separatory funnel, as you can see in this picture, and then we put it through a vacuum pump. And so this procedure allowed us to show students those microplastics that are in our beach sand. And as you can see in this picture down here, we saw yellow ropes on the beach and showed students that, and then we saw those yellow microfibers in our samples in the classroom. So it kind of showed them full circle that these things are breaking down, and we showed them the issue at hand. And they took away a lot of things from our presentation. And then during COVID, we kind of turned that into a virtual presentation that we've done in virtual classrooms, and showed them the procedure virtually, so through videos.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
And then we started doing some kind of smaller cleanups. John had already had, people going out and kind of picking up these yellow ropes. Obviously, he goes out and picks up these all the time. But we started kind of trying to establish some zones and sampling locations where we'd have people go out and collect, and then we'd count those yellow ropes to get a good count of kind of what we were seeing, and then tracking that over months and tide cycles to see when we were seeing the most yellow ropes wash up on our beaches, and just trying to keep track of that information in a central location. Is there anything you want to add, Lee?
No, I think that's really good. And I forgot to say that, we do have this amazing collaboration with the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And, I believe that they are trying really hard to solve this problem, especially a couple of the industry people. And, And it's really impressive. And it's been a really fascinating process to, you know, to work on this problem, which is a local problem. You know, sure, there's tons of other trash out there, but this is coming from just a few miles away, you know, and so, you know, it's been really encouraging to me that the oyster growers are working hard to try to fix this. Yeah, and this slide's a little out of date now, but we do have it's amazing how many groups there are out there. And you know, as far as I'm concerned, John, you can take it from here. John's really been the inspiration behind a lot of this, and he's been doing it for years.
Yeah, I do think it's really important to and really good for us to acknowledge that the growers are that the industry is so dedicated to fixing this problem too. Because I think it's so easy for us to be able to just want to blame and be like, oh, and then you automatically assume that there's just like this, like, oh, it's not my problem type thing, you know, afterwards. But to see like how many of these cleanups we've done, that there are industry people there right along the side helping, and even weekly cleanups that they do on their own, of people going out to clean them up, and that they're committed to trying to find solutions as well. And it's hard because they are like, this is, you know, this is what we've got right now to use, and we've got to try to figure out what to do. And I just think it's like total kudos to them for being invested in also fixing the problem. But
yeah.
So John, you want to give us a little like background of how this yellow rope, what the yellow ropes are, how they get there, how we see them at certain times, and all that good stuff?
Okay. Okay. When I first began running the museum and was on the beach a lot, starting in 14, the yellow ropes showed up, and I asked a few friends about them, and there was this apocryphal story that they came from the oyster industry, and years ago material had been buried and washed away, and that we see it washing out now and again. And over time, we'd see it bloom and we'd see problems. And it became obvious to me early on that this was probably bigger than that. And we got some hints that this was a marine debris. And then a few years later, we started doing regular student-based cleanups with 3rd and 4th graders. And man, if you want to get a beach clean of plastic, put out a bunch of 3rd and 4th graders as a contest, and it will really get clean. And we would come up with mounds of yellow ropes during that process. And so people were starting to pay attention. And it kind of loped along. And we had in 18, we had some displays of yellow ropes at our beachcombing events. And you saw our friend Lynn and her husband. You know, these are basically a 75 and 80-year-old couple who in 19 picked up 25,000 of them on their beach, but you know, in a period from September to January. And it kind of hit critical mass. And I asked the port, and I asked all the growers associations to come to a meeting with our beachcombing groups, because our beachcombing groups wanted to kind of go on the offensive about trying to figure this out. And so we met in January of 19 and found out very quickly, after showing a lot of pictures and a lot of this is what we're dealing with, that Margaret Pallaro, you know, as the Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Association, and her staff were very aware of it, yet were having problems convincing their growers on board of the significance of it. This was the same story with David Begley, who was newly on as the executive director in Willapa. So we had a really great meeting where they agreed that they got a problem, they want to deal with it. We talked about studies. We came up with an agreement at that point to take a message to both of their boards about the importance that we push this forward. And this is where I hope you don't mind me sharing very bluntly how I view some of this advocacy. I had a really nice chat with them all about all the oyster growers, you know, continue to want to be portrayed as good stewards of the environment. They all have been working on trying to get us to allow them to spray again. They want that moniker. And we basically had to hold the club over their head and say, you know, while you're trying to do this, we have your state representatives here in this discussion who are looking at you as producing this material, where we've got old people and kids picking up your waste of a process where you touch it twice, and we're all having to pick it up. And that went back to the boards. The boards decided, oh shit, we got real bad optics here, and we better do something. And so the ship started turning, and we started into a very good industry cleanup, beach community kind of gig of cleaning up. And it was about that time that I ran into Lee and Alexa wanting to talk about microplastics, which we did at the schools, you know, the NOAA marine debris thing. And they all kind of fit together. And so as the yellow rope group has grown, you know, has gotten energy, we're just picking up more and more. We found that we have more and more to pick up, but the industry's come on. So it's been a really good event. And I think, you know, where they come from, you guys all have heard of suspended aquaculture, okay? And you see long lines of, I put a poster that we did with the industries in the chat that you all might want to look at. And that was an agreement with the groups early on to start producing educational materials. So you get this long yellow 3-ply polyline, and you unlay it and you stick a mother oyster in there. Then you hang it out there for a couple years, the oysters grow on it. And then through a couple steps of processing, it gets harvested, chumped, cluster bustered, the whole bit. And initially we thought that's when it got back out into the environment. But actually what happens is it goes into the shell piles. So the shell and yellow ropes go into the shell piles, where they then are reintroduced as what's called culch. That is the spat attachment process in the bags, and also gathering spat. So while they had this in their hand, it would still end up being treated like trash, and it would end up going back out in the environment. And that's why this discussion like we had today about the cluster buster and dealing with oyster shell is so important. And so we're figuring this out. And the two big companies, Pacific and Taylor, are pretty much on top of this. They do not want to have anything to do with this story anymore. They want to solve it. We still have some of the smaller industry growers who just don't want to have to deal with it, but we kind of have to make them deal with it. We've looked at environmentally sound ropes. None of that has worked. They've tried everything from hemp to various plastics, and it hasn't been able to hold up in the marine environment. So that's kind of where it's gone. And right now we're turning the corner. I've had some talks with NOAA. Personally, I believe, yeah, there's Markham. When I talk to people about the importance of shell pile and the legacy issue of shell pile, that was the next oh shit moment for the industry. God, we don't want to have to talk about that. But that's what's out there. That's a pile right down on Grace Harbor that we are going to do probably the first cluster buster or trommel to go through. But that's how it comes out. So, and Lee knows that there in certain areas, those items then blow back into the environment. You know, it isn't just carried in. Sometimes they blow in, or they get sold into oyster shell roads. Or, you know, we had a report of yellow ropes. In fact, I went up and documented it. Does everybody know where Seabrook is? Fairy Tale Land up north of us. I mean, Seabrook is building oyster shell roads, and I went up there with the urban planner to point out how they had yellow ropes now in their lovely shell paths in several places around there. So I believe we're going to see yellow ropes is going to be one of the marine plastics or marine debris we will end up, you know, sunsetting. We will end up seeing an end to that. And that's a really good goal for us all. But we got to then, we're doing the cleanup. We're seeing changes in production. We got to go after shell pile. And Lee hears me complain about this all the time. We got to go after shell pile issues because there's so much. There's virtually millions of these little pieces of rope. I'm not kidding, millions. And the industry knows it, that are out there in the shell piles. And they're sitting around our coastal marine environment in little piles. And so like for Nicole, there's going to be a whole lot of plastic to be had at some point. And the industry now is looking, and right now we're talking about a grant to do shell cleaning because ecology would like to look at it as an augment to erosion control. And there's some real interesting discussions there, but we cannot do that with non-clean shell. The industry's been good. Recently in the last year or so, they've put the notice out within the industry that shell piles are contaminated, and they have stopped selling them or making them available to growers and for agricultural use because they've had so much kickback. Last year, they sold a bunch to several agricultural nursery industries, and it turned into a disaster for them because the guys got done using them and said, what's all this plastic yellow rope that we're dealing with now? So anyway, it's a really fun project, and it's one of the great excuses to get out on the beach and do good. So
so we tend to see them. We've kind of just jumped on board with this here in the middle or the start of kind of the major king tides, and is that kind of, we understand that the king tides bring them all the way up so that they get caught up high and kind of can't get washed back out. But is that kind of is that usually when you see them the most, or are they
tend to come out traditionally with the eel grass shedding that comes out of Willapa, because most of these, let's face it, Willapa is the major growing area. And so that's where these come from. And they flood out, and uniquely, the way the tide and wind hits, they get sprinkled all along the South Beach, starting with the outflow where we're all watching. And we, in essence, predicted that the king tides were going to cause this very large bloom, because it floated debris around the perimeter that hadn't been flooded since the winter of 17-18. That was the last tide that was equivalent to that. So we saw this massive amount. There'd been a really good noticeable declination in the amount out last fall until November. And then it was like game on. But right now, I think that we've cleaned up most of the edge, we believe. And we're at a point where we can really start, continue to document. But for people where we really see this is it's coming out along Washaway, Shoalwater, Grayland, and then they trickle and they reduce and they go all the way up. And I'm sure we will find a pretty good pile of them in Long Beach, or not Long Beach, up in Ocean Shores on the, coming up. But we find them all the way up. I picked up two last time I was up to Rialto. I've picked up a couple down in Oregon, that flow out of the, there's a couple oysters on the south, just south of Tillamook. And so I'm walking down there. Jill, I think you were down there at Base Center not long ago, or Liz, and walked out over the hill there from Garibaldi out onto the coast, and I'm running into yellow rope. And I know it didn't go south, so. Anyway, sorry to wander on, but any questions?
We had one in the chat from Nicole. How many were in that truck in the picture?
Oh, in the truck? That was, well, actually at the beginning, the cheat was at the start of the show, there were 24,900 and some. And then by the time we got done with Dash for Trash, we were up at like 25,280. And that was kind of the joke. And so when we actually had folks from the industry come, and that was kind of the thing they didn't want to have displayed. And the folks decided they wouldn't display it indoors at the show, but they were pretty proud of that pile. So Robert and Lynn put it out in the parking lot. So it got the point across.
Great visual. And then Lucy says she finds them up in Kalaloch.
Kalaloch, sure. They will flow up to Kalaloch. I shared a picture that Lee and I were talking about of me a handful of them, and that was last week up in Seabrook, on the way up. So, they are everywhere.
Up in BC that occasionally will find them that have made him across the straits, and I found one in Oregon, so I don't know how it got south.
Well, those are coming out of the Liz. Those are coming out. The ones in Oregon, they're down along Tillamook Spit, are coming out of an oystery in that's down in Pacific Beach, below the Cape Mears.
Oh, and we have another comment that they found in Coos Bay as well.
Yeah,
They're kind of everywhere.
Okay.
But Willapa is the king of where they come from, and you can tell. Like you say, you go out and there were a group of us, and we're out there for 2.5 hours, and then I'm going to razz Lee. 2.5 hours, we got 16,000 plus, and we spent 3.5 hours counting them. So anyway,
We need
Data's
data.
good. You need data to prove points.
well,
It's
see, and
good.
I operate in my world. We've beat the oyster guys into cooperation, so the ship's going in the right direction, and so just keep them cleaning up. So, but I agree. I agree with data is good.
There's a question in the chat from Kate about, and then we'll jump to Nicole. Sorry, Nicole. What's the protocol for counting the yellow ropes? Do you count ropes no matter how long? And Alexa, you're kind of our rope counting queen. You want to take that?
Yes.
There you are.
Sorry, I was on mute. I kind of wanted to share one of my things to show you guys, but now I have so many tabs open. I don't know if it'll let me.
Is Alexa oh, good.
No, that's the wrong. No, I want to. Oh, there it is on this. It like switched screens on me here. Sorry.
Well, I can answer Kate's question if you want to mess with that. One of the questions was, do we have a protocol for counting the yellow ropes, and doesn't matter how long? And the answer is we just count each yellow rope, so they can be anywhere from a few inches to usually a foot or two tops, but they're usually around 6 inches, and so we just count those numbers. We don't measure them, but we do try to weigh them when we can. And my method is I like to count them as I go, but Alexa really loves to dig. She's like an efficient machine. She's like,
I can't count them as I go. I get too distracted with talking to people.
I got a clicker. Otherwise, it would be hopeless.
I'm trying to open my sheet, but for some reason, there we go. All of the things are turning black. So for our counting, we kind of started out in July, August, September. We had like 150 or so a month. Here, let me see if I can share this now that it's all cleared up. Okay, can you guys see that now?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that graph?
Yeah.
We started counting, small groupings of yellow ropes, and then we started getting a lot more in the high king tides. This is all on the data sheet that I shared in the chat. All the data and figures. But as you can see, in January, we collected over 17,000 yellow ropes. And then up to this point, we've counted 79,868 since, sorry, this should be 2020, since June or so, 2020. So we've counted quite a few yellow ropes. And then we're tracking all new data on this spreadsheet. So if anybody's interested in checking out any new data that's coming in, that link in the chat is where you would find that.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, so we, I think everybody is committed to the idea of getting plastics off the beaches, and so they're not going back out into the ocean. And but then I think, you know, there's this problem now. What do you do with them? And a lot of times the trash that it gets picked up from the beaches end up just back in the landfills, because it's really hard to come up with programs to recycle them. But that's another piece that has been very cool about this entire project, is that now there's also a group of people that are committed to figuring out a way to recycle or reuse them. And one of these options is from Nicole, who works at Not Your Problem, and is trying to figure out a way of that we could recycle or reuse these ropes. Nicole, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and what kind of marine debris you work with, and how you could see these yellow ropes finding their way back out into the world that's not harmful?
So I started Net Your Problem in 2017 to recycle fishing gear. So this was like trawl nets from commercial fishing vessels in Alaska. And so we primarily focus on what is called end of life fishing gear. So that's just stuff that fishermen are done using for whatever reason, and they could take it to the landfill, they could incinerate it, they could keep it in their front yard forever, or they could recycle it with us. So that's the main type of material that we work with. But in Alaska and Washington, a large amount of the marine debris that people find is fishing related. So we get a lot of requests for, you know, can you help me recycle my fishing gear from my marine debris, or can you help me dispose of my just like general beach plastic, I call that. And so we're starting to get involved in this. But the reason that it's tricky is because the recycling processing that we use is mechanical recycling, which is just basically grinding something up, washing it, putting it through heating it up, melting it, and putting it through what's called an extruder, which just produces like very tiny plastic pellets, or nurdles. Those are sometimes referred to as. That is then the raw material for manufacture of any kind of plastic products. So John mentioned the yellow ropes are poly, which stands for polypropylene, which is a type of plastic that's identified by the number 5 thing in the chasing arrow symbol on your plastic products. So technically anything that is made out of polypropylene could theoretically be made from these yellow ropes. And so that's what we're trying to do here, that there's a recycling company in British Columbia that is sort of pioneering this recycling a beach plastic thing. And in terms of recycling, the yellow ropes are just like a gold mine, because they're all the same type of plastic, so you don't have to sort it into different things. They're all the same color, so homogeneity, I guess, is like really the name of the game in recycling, and the yellow ropes are absolutely perfect for that. So all these ropes that are being collected, 79,800, whatever Alexa said, we could send those to this recycling company in British Columbia. They could turn them into polypropylene plastic pellets, and then anybody could purchase those on the global plastics market and choose to manufacture their products out of that, and have this amazing story that they could tell about the source of their plastic, and they're reducing carbon emissions because they're not using virgin plastics, and they're reducing carbon emissions because they're not sending plastic to the landfill, and protecting the ocean, and all of these really great stories. And the funny thing, I mean, it's not really funny, but the shocking thing for me about this whole thing is that beach plastic or ocean bound plastic, or whatever word you want to use for it, is in such high demand in terms of for manufacturers, that the demand is greater than the supply, which is just totally mind-boggling. Because if you think about how much plastic there is on the beach, how can the supply not be there to meet the demand? So it's really about figuring out the financial model of how do we just like sort all the finances out to get this raw material to the people that can sell it in their products. And one of the things that we say at Net Your Problem is that plastic is not a waste, it's a resource, because it really is. Plastic, you know, recycling has its challenges. I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but recycling can contribute to the circular economy by keeping, you know, resources in the supply chain for longer than just one use. So recycling is not technically circular in the definition of it, but it can absolutely contribute. And that's what I'm trying to bring to this yellow rope group, is how do we dispose of this material in the best way possible?
So with this, with the work that we've been doing out at Westport and the collection of all the ropes in that area, so one of the situations you're at right now is figuring out how to get them from point A to point B. And so there's some work going on between all these groups. I'm not really sure how many, there's been a lot of talk about grants and who's applying for grants and which organization with Lee's kind of task force. But just for situational awareness for everybody, that there's a lot of talks going on and a lot of work right now and trying to figure out how we could come up with the funds to, because John's been storing, well, John and Alexa are storing all of these ropes. And so they're out there, they're ready, and at least they're not going to landfill, but you know, at some point we have to figure out how to get them from Westport to British Columbia. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, so I'm working on that, yeah, with these members of the working group. And I think for me, I'm not a huge fan of the grants model, because I think we can't rely on like volunteers and unpaid labor and like grants to fund this. The model, I'm set up as a for-profit company. So the way that I deal with the net waste is the fishing companies pay to get rid of their garbage. And that I don't think is a really foreign concept. I pay for my garbage to be collected in the driveway here in Issaquah. So I think for me personally, I really want to try to move away from this somebody else should pay for it model, and like everybody should volunteer all of their time, to really building a sustainable, long-term, like financially sound plan for dealing with this garbage. And I think, you know, on the agenda that I saw, Lee also wanted to talk about like other types of aquaculture waste, not just the yellow ropes. And so I think that is also a huge part of it, is like growers produce plastic waste as part of their operations. And so can we also do some recycling of that? It's high density polyethylene is some of the oyster bags that I've tested, which is the same type of plastic that you find in commercial trawl nets. So that can also be recycled. That's the number 2 in the chasing arrows thing. So, I mean, I think we have a long way to go in terms of figuring out how to do this, but that's my focus, is to not always be just relying on like the goodwill of people and grants to figure out how to pay for all this stuff.
So does anybody have any questions they want to pop in for John, Alexa, Lee, Nicole?
One thing I wanted to add too is I don't think I really fully answered Kate's question. So I wanted to share and just share the locations of where we've been collecting the ropes, if that's okay. So this is kind of the map of where we've been collecting ropes from, the transects. And so we've measured the length of these, and then we have volunteers walk that transect along the rack line in each of these areas. This is the one that we've started mostly and had most of our volunteers focus on, is the South Warrenton Road spot. And then we've been kind of branching out and surveying some of these other areas and counting yellow ropes from them. There are areas that that John has known about for a very, very long time, but that we are trying to just count ropes from those areas as well. So I just wanted to add that because I didn't really cover that when I answered your question earlier.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Nicole, but I think since we're just starting this up, that, you know, we need to start somewhere. And what the growers need to do is, you know, include this in their cost of business, you know.
Absolutely.
I had a quick question that I know has come up at a couple of the cleanups that I'm hoping that maybe John can answer. But people ask why the ropes are that 3, 4, 5 inch length. And what John, do you know the process they like they cut, or why are all the ropes that same kind of short length?
I want to butt in because I have a picture. I'm addicted to pictures. Let's see.
That seems like the one question that comes up every time we do a cleanup from people that are just on the beach. You're like, why are they like, they're all like this?
So so I've been out with a couple of growers. I asked to go out and watch how they harvest oysters. And so this is one kind of small operation. And so what they do, this type of oyster culture, they weave the rope into the mother oyster and set it out on lines that are attached to metal T-posts. And so, and then they leave it out there for 2 or 3 years. And so the spat collects on the mother oyster and kind of spreads out on the rope. So these are all the clusters when they go out 2 or 3 years later to do the harvest run. You know, this is what they pull in. And so I think when they put the mother oyster out, they're about a foot apart. And then, so that's how that's why the ropes are kind of consistently, you know, around a foot or shorter.
It has to do with the distance between placing the mother shell in the unlaying and putting the mother shell in the 3-part rope.
Right.
And so that ends up, that's just how they take the clumps apart. And like, you know, there's Brady famously never has had yellow ropes. They always are telling the story. They bring everything they do, they bring in and completely unlay. So they don't do this in the same process. They also spat differently. I don't have it pulled out here, but if you go down to Nakata and look at the right time of year, you'll see all the culch bag or the lines being rebuilt with the mother shell in and then put into bags for them to put out to collect spat. In addition, before they string them, there's several ways that they collect spat. Actually, what I keep learning is there's about as many different ways to do oysters as there are oyster growers. You know, that kind of makes it hard to. It's not very homogeneous.
So can I follow up with a question? Because I've been trying to get my information from watching videos and asking questions about, like, I can tell that the piece is long enough that somebody had it in his hand and at one point. So then is the cluster buster going to get the shell removed from the piece of line? And then is there an opportunity to take the line and put it like in a certain place that's not in the middle of the shell pile, like in a garbage container?
Well, that's part of that's the move right now. And I think, Lee, did they send forward the videos that were shared around today of the busters?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that is the answer. And that's one of the frustrating parts with this as a marine debris, is it's something that basically the industry is touching and then allowing to still get into the environment. And so it isn't like, you know, a lost crab pot or a lost float that happens. This is like truly processed garbage, process waste. and it's pretty easy to beat them up about it. But you know, that's kind of what we're dealing with there. You know, it's just a lot of little strings.
And
It's interesting you say that, John, because I think too, like when people think about what are solutions to marine debris or like ocean plastic, to me, the answer is very simple. It's waste management. If you manage all of your waste properly, then you're not going to have anything in the ocean or on land. And that's not like a super sexy thing to talk about, but that really is, I think, what is needed in a lot of these cases. It's just managing your garbage properly.
Well, and right, exactly, Nicole. And Kate, you saw that earlier picture that had the shell pile and it had all kinds of yellow ropes in it. That's an example of sometimes as it goes through the cluster busters, a lot of them will release and the clipped rope will come out and they will pick those up. But so many of them are still attached by that mass of growth that they're tied into the shell, and the shell then becomes as, you know, as seed base for all the different kinds of replanting. So that yellow rope goes back out. The cluster buster or the grinders, what they're going to do is grind those remnants down more, and we're hoping to see them use air, not water, but they'll be able to blast the yellow ropes off into a separate stream. And Nicole brings up waste management. We've talked to a couple recycling industry folks who basically said this isn't a problem. We use air blast to separate different density materials all day long in this country. And so the goal is that we will end up with a clean pile of oysters at the end, and all the yellow ropes end up back in hand, clean, you know, with all the shell gone, and it becomes real simple. And then we'll give them to Nicole.
I just threw in the chat a little video I found on YouTube today when we were having a meeting with the group, and it's kind of just a sample of a version of a cluster buster. I think this is a real small scale one compared to what we're talking about needing it, that they're looking for to really tackle this.
Yeah,
problem.
that's a really fun idea. And if any of you have ever seen any of these Discovery Channel Gold shows, okay, think about what the discussion is right now is a 30 or 40 foot trommel that the shell goes through, and big rotating drums, gravity separating, and when you get done, you have streams of stuff coming out, and the goal is just to blow off the yellow ropes. And then the ultimate goal is to get that to be available to all the growers, in some sort of cooperative greater good, so that every grower can go clean his legacy pile. We spoke on that in the meeting today, which was very positive. And then we've solved the problem. So anyway, so now we got to go clean up all the damn plastic bottles that are all over this week. I'm a big one on reminding everybody yellow ropes are pretty sexy right now, but man, we got a lot of other garbage to get.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for kind of helping us out and explaining. I know there's so many people out there that are just, we've been putting a lot of pictures up of us cleaning the ropes up, but then a lot of questions that come along with them. Like what are they from? What do we do with them? What's the, and so this was super helpful. And I know we recorded it because a lot of people that said they couldn't make it tonight are interested. So there's a lot of interest out there about it. And so hopefully we can also try to get those people involved in helping us get them cleaned up in the meantime before we get this big picture all figured out with the growers and everybody else. But
so you told them that this is what all the cool kids do, right?
Yeah, cleaning up the ropes. That's what
we're special.
Awesome. Well,
great though.
Joe,
so many like marine debris issues seem so unsolvable. Like it's just such a big issue, and this is like a specific thing that we can work with industry and overcome and like fix this one problem. So I just find it really inspiring and a great sort of narrative to work on. So I appreciate all your efforts.
Yeah.
Yay. Joe, do you have end of meeting wrap ups you want to?
No, that was great, guys. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate the info. Super fascinating, and yeah, kudos to you for the direct action. I love it.
And
Yeah.
we have ducks. We have ducks down where in the same area. So
Oh.
Yellow
down-
rope
oh,
and ducks.
we have
Oh,
ducks
yeah.
in saltwater.
Yeah.
Hey,
The next
hey, little
one.
one. Awesome.
Sweet babe. Kate, I know you posted in the chat about sharing the recording, so I will upload this to, we have a Washington Surfrider YouTube channel, and then we will share it on Olympia chapter social media as well. So, but always you feel free to reach out directly for a link to the recording.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Oh,
thanks
awesome.
everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.